So I want to invite Alex Atmel, who is a managing director at Energy Pro, James Fenner, who is leading the work of Carbon Coop in the UK on metered energy savings. And online, we also have Juan Antonio Arenda Urson, who is coordinating the Fresco project. And well, while everyone comes up, perhaps Monica, and we will have the questions. I want to ask, in this work that has started now, what do you find being the main barriers or like the main needs that might need to be overcome should this eventually come to fruition?
The main, if we want to, for example, if we want to, because the idea is to introduce a new model, to not to remove the current grants or to the current subsidies. So we want to introduce a new model to promote and to foster this kind of deep renovation in buildings. So probably to regulate in not to regulate this model in order to facilitate, because if, for example, if we are talking to start as a public institution, we need the tools to how to regulate that. No, so probably it would be one of the, and also to that it's directly linked with the electric or the energy market regulation, because goes together.
Thank you. I would also like perhaps to focus first on the difficulties we face, because it's a new system. We don't necessarily know how to go about it, despite having some experience from the US. So I want to then give the floor to Han, who is online, and ask how has it been with starting the demonstrators, at least in the Fresco project, in the sense when we will start implementing something for pay for performance, what are the main obstacles that we will first encounter?
Thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to take part in this interesting event. So yes, coordinator of Fresco project. So we are developing a new generation of energy services for domestic sector, for the residential sector, based on P4P approach. So we are actually building on the current existing energy performance contracts and moving them forward to a pay for performance based. And we are doing that on a platform that enables real-time data collection from the buildings with low-cost systems for data capturing and storage, and using artificial intelligence analytics to provide services both for efficiency and for demand response to the grid. So the main barriers that we are finding so far, it is, on the technical side, especially the lack of standardization of systems, the lack of ways to involve the current legacy equipment in domestic sector. And this is a problem that we are having. So the data is various and it's very diverse, and it's difficult to integrate them into a single platform or architecture. And the second, on the business side, the problem that we are facing is that these kind of contracts are not still demanded by the domestic sector. So in other words, the demand has to be created by companies, by the service providers. So for them to be motivated to create this demand in the market, we need to provide them with useful tools that help them to integrate this data and make the best use of it to provide valuable services to users that can be well rated by users. And this is the way we create new markets and new demand, and involving the domestic sector in the efficiency and demand response schemes that currently they are out, and it's a huge amount of energy that we are living outside just because, there is high transaction costs and low energy incomes. So that's the real challenge that we are facing in my view.
Thank you very much, Juan. Let me also take a moment to welcome Lieven Vastralen. Lieven, excuse me, I didn't introduce you. I thought something happened you couldn't join eventually. It's very good to see you here. Who is also leading the work in Belesco. You're the president of the Belgian Association of ESCOs. So your view is very much welcome here. So we heard some of the first difficulties and barriers. I want Alex to turn to you and ask, I mean, we've been working in parallel the past couple of years, and you've advanced work significantly in the UK. I want to ask how it came about to convince key actors, apply to this bid that we were mentioning earlier. Just maybe give us a bit of the storyline, like maybe some inspiration of what to follow.
I'll try. Hi everybody, and thanks very much for having me. So I lead the consultancy team at EP Group. Our job is to we specialize in energy efficiency. Our job, broadly speaking, is to facilitate the movement of private capital into energy efficiency, to improve the use of energy in different contexts. And in that context, we've been working for a number of years with a company called Recurve that have come up a few times in the conversation, who provide a platform for the delivery of advanced measurement and verification, and also the transactions that underpin pay-for-performance schemes in various parts of the US. Now, a few years ago, we were looking at a market entry strategy for Recurve into the UK and Europe, and examining the differences between the market conditions that their platform had been developed under and the conditions that prevailed in primarily in the UK, but we looked at other markets as well. And they are very different. There are real differences in the model that needs to be adopted when you're looking at a deregulated energy market that doesn't practice integrated resource planning. And broadly speaking, different companies with different sets of shareholders and different regulations are responsible for generating, transmitting, distributing, selling and consuming the electricity or power or gas in a deregulated market. So that gives rise to these contractual interface points that mean that it's no one entity has a full view of the best way to bring an energy system to net zero. They have to be encouraged to do the right thing with their slice of the energy system. And I think where we got to with our thinking was it's important to be really clear here about the way that homes are going to have to decarbonize as we all head towards net zero. Obviously, there are loads of exceptions, but a typical home, let's say, is probably quite badly performing from a fabric perspective, is probably heated by gas and has gas hot water, and may well be owned by a landlord with virtually no interest in the energy performance of that building. So those are not new problems, but they're all quite tricky problems. And add to that the problem that the organization that stands to benefit the most from, or rather the entity that stands to benefit the most from decarbonizing that home is nowhere in the picture. That's a system level benefit that's not valued really in any way. So it became clear to us that what was going to happen, and probably, if we're honest, what still will happen, is that network operators will facilitate the electrification of heat by installing loads of new copper wires everywhere. And they'll vastly increase the electrical capacity on the distribution network as everybody electrifies their heat with heat pumps, electrifies their transport with electric vehicles. And that'll be great for them because they make a return on the assets that they have under management at any given time. So that'll be a terrific result if you're a network operator. But there are very, very limited social benefits from putting new copper in the ground, whereas there are huge social benefits and participatory benefits for improving the energy efficiency of somebody's home. So we have to find a way to bridge that interface point between electricity distributor and the home, which is a point at which there is virtually no contact between those two entities at the moment, because the householder deals with a retailer and not with a distributor. So that's quite a hard exam question to solve when you're looking at how to incentivize pay for performance. It's made even harder. Sorry, you wanted me to be uplifting, didn't you? But it's made even harder by the fact that these entities are terrible at sharing data with each other and don't understand the consumer protections around smart meter data. So anyway, the long story short is that we have had to start again when it comes to looking at how to get towards a pay for performance structure, and indeed even reevaluating whether that's even the right endpoint. Really the question is, how do you use data and new market mechanisms to incentivize and encourage the uptake of radical energy efficiency by consumers, and try not to be too prescriptive in the way that you do that. And we have made some progress. We've been able to rally the support of certain segments of the financial community around that. James can talk in more detail in a second, but we will hopefully be starting a large innovation project in a few months' time to pilot some aspects of this. And I think we have made some progress on the measurement and verification, working with the SENSEI project as inspiration, and also sharing technical details as well. So there are reasons to be cheerful, but there are also lots of barriers in the way. This is not an easy thing to undertake, and one has to be very flexible and open-minded about the precise way that you structure these schemes.
I mean, the energy transition is not easy to undertake, but we really need to do it. James, you want to add to it, perhaps some aspects on M&V, financing, the new work that you'll be looking into, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Filipos. And yeah, thanks again so much for inviting me on behalf of Carbon Co-op to speak at this conference. This is very, very relevant to the work that we're doing at Carbon Co-op, and also in consortium with Alex of EP and a few other partners in the UK, including the local Electricity Northwest DNO up in Greater Manchester. So yeah, just a little bit about Carbon Co-op to kind of explain what we do. So we're essentially a membership-based energy cooperative. So we engage householders across the UK, primarily focused in the Greater Manchester area. But we essentially try and engage householders and educate them and empower them to engage in those radical emissions reductions that we all need to make in the home. In the UK, this is a particular problem. So it's a well-known fact that households in the UK are amongst the least efficient in Europe, and that actually means that 21% of the entire UK emissions portfolio comes from the residential building sector in particular. So this is really what we're trying to focus on, and that's very much a focus of the consortium bid that Carbon Co-op and EP Group have put together. So just to kind of dive a little bit into what we're trying to do here. We're trying to really capitalize on that pinch point between the distribution network operator and households that Alex was describing, and thinking about how can we kind of maximize benefits to householders in terms of enabling them to derive energy efficiency benefits, i.e. comfort, health, and obviously financial savings as well. And how can we also demonstrate to distribution network operators that they can benefit from investing in energy efficiency, as opposed to alternatives such as network reinforcement. So the basic intuition of what we're proposing is that as the electricity system starts to increase in throughput and volume, it's going to start to reach capacity, and we're going to get areas of increasing congestion, particularly in urban areas. And what this is going to cause real issues for the distribution network operator. So instead of investing in network reinforcement, which, as Alex said, can be very costly, we're really trying to measure and verify the impact that energy efficiency investment will have, so that the DNO can quite clearly point to the benefits and the avoided energy from energy efficiency as a direct comparator to the costs that network reinforcement would have taken, for example. So that's the kind of broad overview of what we're really proposing. But obviously there are some serious barriers to implementing this, and really we see this as very much a kind of demonstrator project, and using this to demonstrate the potential of pay-for-performance, both in the UK and hopefully more broadly in Europe. But in the initial stages, we're really going to focus on trying to explore some of the possible modeling tools that we can use. So we're going to be looking at potentially using things like Insight, which Sotira spoke to beforehand. My work in particular focuses on trying to extend and adapt the existing Caltrack methodology that's been developed by Recurve and by their open source collaborators over in the US. We're also going to be focusing quite a lot on kind of ethical and governance issues surrounding data access. Obviously, this is a really big issue in measurement and verification, and especially when you get into areas of things like occupancy monitoring. There are particular ethical issues around monitoring the movements of private individuals in their homes. And yeah, that's something that we're really trying to explore. You know, to what extent how can you kind of optimize that occupancy privacy trade-off, and really kind of trying to deal with questions around that. The solution that Carbon Co-op has found so far to that is really kind of through direct engagement with householders. So instead of working with the distribution network operator or with energy suppliers to source household consumption data, actually what we do is we engage with our members and secure direct consent to process and to work with their energy consumption data, so that they can then participate in demand side reduction programs, and that presents direct financial benefits to householders involved in our cooperative as well. And then finally, I guess the most important factor for me, aside from probably more important actually than all of the modeling and the data access pieces, are because a lot of effort and a lot of work has already gone into modeling and data access, and we've got a wealth of highly complex measurement and verification models, and there's a lot of very exciting research going on here. But what we're really lacking, I think, is what's really been the focus of this conference so far, which is really about kind of designing regulatory structures, so that we can, well, first of all, designing regulatory structures, and also securing buy-in from the finance community, because obviously, you can predict counterfactual on energy consumption as accurately as you want, but actually, I think, in my opinion, a lot of this stuff is already competitive with some of the offerings on the market that we see. So, for example, NatWest Group and I know Ecology Building Society in the UK as well already offer green mortgages for home renovations on the basis of energy performance certificates, and a lot of this work is really competitive with EPCs already in terms of uncertainty. So I think that's kind of the final point I'd wrap up with, is just to kind of emphasize that that third barrier of really kind of trying to engage the finance community is really what we're trying to demonstrate through this innovation project that we're proposing, and using this as a demonstrator to ensure that such programs can be replicated in the future.
There's lots to learn there.
Yeah.
I wish you all the best for this. I want to ask Lieve van Stralen now, who is online, about the situation in Belgium. What's the view of ESCOs as key market actors in the system? Do you see a potential market? Any hesitations or opportunities you see? And if you have had similar discussions with other actors, and how you see the environment in this country, at least.
Yes, thank you very much, Philippos, and once again, my apologies for being a bit late into the panel. I had some issues. Yeah, to come back to your question, I do see both opportunities and barriers, let's say. I myself got, let's say, more knowledgeable about pay for performance some time ago. I think it was when Charles from Factor 4, one of the partners, approached me about pay for performance, and my first reaction was, paying for performance. We've been doing that for the last 15 years. But then as we went down the line of the discussion, of course, a lot of new topics came up. The role of DSOs and TSOs in the model, and that's something that in the meantime I had been working myself, not only within Balesco, but also within my own, let's say, primary activities at Energy Invest, because I've been involved in energy services and energy performance contracting, ESCOs, and third-party financing, everything that goes with it for about 15 years. And we had recently been started working on ways to extend the classical EPC model for buildings to integrate, things like flexibility, demand response, in a project that maybe some of you heard of, called Ambience project. And so that kind of triggered immediately some of the topics that are also covered in pay for performance. And I think that's what we are looking now at from a Balesco point of view, is to see how can, let's say, both models, which are already related, where can we find synergy? We identify which stakeholders to involve, because, for example, Alexi mentioned, the utilities aren't necessarily talking to the homeowners or to the DSOs, but I can assure you, ESCOs are not talking to homeowners and not talking to DSOs either. So there's a big effort to do. In the Ambience project, we did look at, for example, the role that ESCOs could play as aggregators of such flexibility, and also as aggregators of basic energy savings, because that's their core business. It has been their core business for several decades, but they haven't necessarily been good at aggregating that, certainly towards the network operators. And one of the things that we see is that, yes, there is somebody paying for performance in terms of energy savings, even guaranteed energy savings, but that money is not going to the challenges that network operators are. That money is just going to, let's say, building owners investing in energy upgrades of their buildings. And we must face also the fact that the residential home market has not been the biggest focus and the biggest success in terms of ESCO models. It's been mainly public buildings and commercial buildings to a certain extent. There are some exceptions, and if you look at, for example, some of the integrated renovation models used for, in the Netherlands, in France, UK, like Energiesprong. Those are models that, at least in social housing, have been successful, and I think have a lot of potential for pay for performance models. And so that's also in Belgium some of the areas that we are looking for. How can we renovate social housing neighborhoods, typically relatively identical or similar buildings, 50 buildings, 100 buildings, aggregate not only energy savings, but also aggregate flexibility from PV panels, from batteries, either at a neighborhood level or potentially at the building level, and so on. So yeah, these are some of the topics I think we are really interested in looking at. How can we find synergies between what we then call the active building EPC business model that ESCOs are, could potentially use, and the more broader aggregation of them in larger pay for performance models. So is there a market for it? Probably not today, but we think that there is certainly potential market for it in Belgium also in the coming years. We will have to lift some, let's say, some barriers that are not so much related to regulation, but they're more related to, who's driving the business model forward and who's taking the initiative to see that not only there is money to make, but there is CO2 to save. And if we valorize that CO2, then there probably are successful business models, and that will be a lot of our focus.
Thank you very much, Lieven. Alex, I have something to say, and I would also like to invite Charles, who is in the room, because we've had similar discussions at some point, if I remember well, with the DSO. If you want to make a comment or transfer the view afterwards, very much welcome. Alex?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention, picking up on that point about what's the best way to what's the best way to start? How do you move a market towards more of a pay for performance model? And the point, of course, as we've heard, is that there are no aggregators right now. There is nobody doing this. So who are they going to be? They could be, big existing ESCOs, of course, or they could be the kind of contractor supply chain that currently delivers the energy efficiency obligation schemes that there are in lots of markets. So we, early on when we were structuring the idea of pay for performance and metering energy savings in our own minds as much as anything else, we had the opportunity to pitch the idea to a trade body of contractors that deliver a program called ECO in the UK, which is the Supplier Obligation Scheme. So it's the energy retailers that have to fulfill a certain, quota of obligations to help vulnerable customers with energy efficiency. And shall we say that the idea that they should just be paid for kilowatt hours that they save rather than being paid for arriving at a building and maybe putting some cavity wall insulation in. That idea did not go down particularly well. And I think we have to be very conscious that this is a huge shift in the business model of the existing supply chain. And what's needed at every layer of that value chain is confidence. The only place that confidence is going to come from is by collecting data from absolutely loads, hundreds of thousands of retrofits, and seeing what the data tells us. We need to accurately and consistently evaluate the impact of fuel poverty and underheating and comfort taking. We need to understand how the results perform in different archetypes, different ages of building, different types of lifestyle and different types of user. And we should always keep in mind, anybody that's been involved with measurement and verification will tell you that as soon as you start to measure and verify something properly, the performance that the contractor thought they were achieving, they're not achieving it. That there is a real realization rate problem when it comes to actually measuring performance. So we've got to give the supply chain, we can't give them too much rope, but we've got to give them a soft landing into this. We've got to do lots of pilots, lots of demonstrators. I'm not somebody that sits here and advocates more and more pilots very happily, but that is what's needed. Large amounts of data that are going to give us the confidence collectively to move forward with these models, because the obligated suppliers are not going to queue up to become aggregators overnight. That is not their business model at the moment. Okay.
Many thanks for these insights. Would we have any questions from the audience before we move ahead? If you want to ask something, you're very much willing. And also online, please feel free to send specific questions. Maybe another aspect we could touch briefly upon is indeed measurement and verification. So, like, you are focusing on M&V. You're also saying how it will put quite a few existing market players in a difficult place. And I also wonder, since we're already doing it to some extent, as Lieven mentioned, in existing ESCO schemes, does it really pose a danger, or is it an opportunity to move ahead? Like, could these technological advancements not be taken up at the end of the day? And also don't know, Monica, what experience you might have with the DSOs that you were discussing. So I'm more trying to understand how this technological developments could actually facilitate something in the EU as they have done in the US, or are we running up against some important disruptor that will face a backlash or something?
Yes, so far it's not possible, or it's difficult to convince the DSOs or TCOs to go to this way, but I now need these obligations to pay to this national fund this money. But no, there is no way to change their mind, to change their business, to go to this go this way. And the possibility, I don't know if someone mentioned here, the possibility is to sell, instead of selling savings, sell the customers a service. In this service, sell a complete product, savings and energy and savings and on other things. Probably I don't know, because today we are paying for all service. We need this television, we pay for these services. Because if I don't like this service, I'm going to look for another company. Probably could be a possibility to make more competitive if different utilities or DCOs sells and introduce, for example, the flexibility or demand response inside these products in another way, in a way that the customers can understand. Probably the technicians understand the technical part, but for the customers could be difficult to, okay, I participate in demand response, but not all of them understand what are they involved with. So the business model, it's a P4P is a model to incentivize the renovation, but not only in the residential sector, but also on other sectors. We have to investigate, and it also create different energy efficiency aggregators specialized in different sectors. This is a P4P model, but at the same time, we can combine this with the products that the utilities can sell to the customers. So I think there are a lot of ideas on the table, and we have to
the efficiency as a service approach as well. Yeah.
How do you see, probably just thinking what Monica said, so the DSOs have to sell services, no, on the DSOs, but as they are territory bind, so they are like monopolistic players. So and that's why they are not very interested in providing services, a part of those that they're giving. But probably there is some role of the energy suppliers, like intermediaries of this market. So probably this is something to explore. They could be the intermediaries between that you can change as a final consumer to intermediate with the DSO in providing these services. I think this is something to be explored. I would like to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And in terms of customer interface, you're absolutely right. The energy supply companies have much more of a relationship with consumers than distribution network operators, and definitely have that kind of relationship management infrastructure, which is super important. So that's kind of to the advantage of that point. I think aside from that, just going back to Alex's original point, certainly in the UK, and the way that the energy company supplier obligation scheme is run, because that scheme essentially operates on the basis of deemed savings, you do essentially get quite significant windfalls handed to energy supply companies. So that, and any move toward, in my opinion, any move towards suppliers being intermediaries in such a system would have to be accompanied by some pretty radical regulatory overhaul as well, replacing the architecture of the existing supplier obligation schemes. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Well, I think that's all right. I mean, I think I'm quite skeptical about a lot of the existing players in the energy system and their ability to identify this as an opportunity and to, I mean, essentially in a deregulated system, the perversity of it is that every player does what the regulator tells them and tries to make as much money from doing it as possible. So the game becomes to try and rein in some of their instincts to try and game whatever role it is that they have. And actually you lose sight of the big picture, which is that we should be trying to transition to a zero carbon, a net zero carbon energy system. So, I mean, I would look to new players coming in, or players that at least can fundamentally see that opportunity and change their business model. The closest retailer is probably Octopus in the UK that has shown an ability to, I suppose you'd call it value stacking, you know, to bring together different aspects into a single tariff such that consumers are incentivized to think about when they're using energy. You know, it's not too much of a leap to imagine that being folded together with actually installing new hardware, new kit in the building, and for that to be financed by an external finance provider. And that's really why we're doing metering energy savings, is because you can value stack and you can put together consumer propositions on the back of that give them access to finance and access to new stuff. That's why it's interesting. But yeah, I'm not sure, Stoyan, that the existing retailers are going to be the ones to do that. Maybe that's I'm just cynical, but I don't have a lot of faith there, I'm afraid.
There's room for new participants in the market to enter these new niches.
One of the, if there's also, yeah, just a room maybe for a quick feedback on that. One of the reasons we're looking at energy service companies, and you know, it's not just because we are an association that has members that are, among others, energy service companies, but it's the fact that they are, in general, particularly if we're going to low or zero carbon building renovations, so you know they're going to be there for the long term. They are the ones who not only design, install, but also maintain equipment. And if we have to manage, or if somebody has to manage flexibility in the building, it has to be the company that is in charge of managing the heat pumps or the charging stations or whatever other equipment that delivers flexibility, the solar panels, and that happens to be, at least performance contracting implementations, happens to be the energy service company. And that's why we think they are a more or less obvious potential party, at least, to do that. The second thing is because they have the building management system. And if you want to, let's say, not only estimate flexibility, but you have to manage it real time, you have to be let's say the party that controls the building management system, that can manage that flexibility in the building with the customer. And I think therefore they're not necessarily badly placed. And I think finally, it means also integrating the algorithms into such building management systems. So I think there are a number of, let's say, opportunities. Will they do it? I think it will mainly depend on their capability also to interact with a party that we haven't discussed much yet, and they're so-called one-stop shops. Particularly in the public sector, you see those companies, public, sometimes public-private, but that basically manage a portfolio of hundreds, or not, if not thousands, of buildings. But that what they do is they basically prepare them to put them into the market, where energy service companies or other, let's say, building companies can tender for. And so they have an intrinsic aggregation capacity on the demand side. So if you combine the demand side aggregation capacity of such one-stop shops with the supply side aggregation capacity of energy service companies or similar, again, I fully agree with what Alex said, that there may be other new players who are taking on that role. But if you combine, then I think then you have a potential recipe for success for putting out a business model that could work. I'm not saying it's guaranteed success, but yeah, that's the type of things I think we will be looking into, at least in the coming years.
And just if there's time, just to quickly come back on that, and also to address Monica's point from before. Yeah, I think the one-stop shop is absolutely essential to the functioning of any such system. The kind of theoretical basis of pay for performance in that consumers or building owners essentially kind of pay back the cost of their energy retrofit over a set period of time, and that sort of all evens itself out. Does kind of ignore some of the more complex and problematic elements of retrofit delivery, particularly in relation to supply chains. And one of the chief experiences we have at Carbon Co-op and through our sister retrofit delivery company is that issue of supply chains, and that we're starting to try and integrate M&V practices and pay for performance in our business model. That's definitely going to be one of the biggest challenges that we've got coming up, is just kind of trying to integrate that with some of the more complicated issues of supply chain building and skills.
Yeah, very good point. And also the availability of installers and technical professionals. We have run way over time, as we should. I want to invite maybe some last comments from the panel, and also maybe a last question if there is from the audience. In 1 or 2 sentences, what are the main takeaways that everyone might have? Also, even on relating to like this area that we're working, pay for performance, and its surroundings. Juan, shall we start with you?
Yeah, so it's a lot of things that have been said today, and it's difficult to wrap up. But I think that pay for performance is not used at all at the moment, but is the basis for the future. And I think that former EPC formats for contracting, they're now going to be not in use. And being replaced by pay for performance. And the reason why this is not still in the market is because that we need to have successful examples and successful stories that can push this initiative forward and be able to use it widely. I think that current actors like retailers and DSOs should not play this role for the market shift, and it should be instead ESCOs and aggregators both for demand flexibility, but also for efficiency to be able to collect and consolidate these savings in bundles that can be marketized and can be presented as valuable assets in the electricity market. So that's my view, and I think that we are contributing with projects like SENSEI or other projects mentioned today to this future approach.
Great, thank you very much. Lieven, perhaps?
Yes, a few thoughts. I think, again, in terms of the sectors that we see potential, it's probably, as I mentioned earlier, social housing. Also because there is an intrinsic aggregation capacity by social housing companies that have several of tens or several of hundreds houses in their portfolio. And if you look at, for example, Belgium, but it's not different from other countries, there's quite a significant building portfolio there. I think in Belgium there's about 400,000 social housing. So I'm not saying it's easy, but they have a relatively easy way going forward in I think in identifying a business model that can work. And as I said, we already did some work on that. I think the second one is probably public buildings, again, from the fact that they are the ones with the highest ambition levels in terms of building renovation and retrofits, and because of the role that one-stop shops can play. For the rest, I'm interested, and I would also suggest, maybe to look at those markets where there has already been some success, and probably the US being the first. How did successful pay-for-performance models come forward? Who took the initiative? and which were the players that made them successful in specific segments. And I think we should also try to look at that, at the US market and maybe other markets where there's been some successes already. And okay, Europe is specific in any case, but maybe we can learn from those markets too.
Thank you very much. Monica, any final remarks?
Well, probably because we commented this several times that that we can start this implementation of this kind of schemes from the public administration. Probably, as we currently use it, the EPC model, probably we need to reformulate the current tenders, or how to reformulate the contracts and how we implement them, and go through a new EPC model, or that could be compatible with the P4P schemes. But to do that, we need to be more accurate with the data, and to estimate or monitor to follow the savings. So probably public administration could start this work, but need this investigation, or the technical from the experts, or from the measurement and verification, to be ensured that the savings, and to be also an example for the private sector.
Yeah, sure. So I think four items really. So assuming we have proactive regulation coming through, and proactivity from the top down, then I think this is going to be a very there's a lot of scope for SME innovation in the M&V space, and SMEs starting to adopt M&V tools. But that needs to be supplemented by, first of all, awareness. So awareness in the financial sector, awareness of the benefits that M&V can bring and pay for performance, increasing awareness of and ethical and governance use of data. And then finally, just increasing training and the accessibility of M&V tools. So one thing I haven't mentioned is the fact that most M&V tools require you to be able to code, and I think there's a lot of scope for SMEs starting to think about use of no-code models, and being able to do monitoring, verification without with just simple web apps, that sort of thing, to try and widen access to M&V and stimulate innovation.
Many thanks. Maybe the last point also is important to influence.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it's very pleasing to be able to sit in a room with 30 people and however many people are online, and have a really detailed and nuanced conversation about this stuff. And that is not something that was possible even a few years ago. And I think that the SENSEI project, the work that RAP have done on this, and also, our work with the Green Finance Institute, where we put together a white paper on this and published it, you can find online. All of that has started to move this up the agenda a little bit, to the point where we can start to collectively solve some of the, very significant challenges in getting it mobilized. But I think the final thought from me is just to keep really focused on what are we trying to achieve. What, for me, just thinking about the homes, the domestic application of this, we're trying to allow most people in their homes to benefit from having a retrofit, and therefore using less energy, having a better quality of life. That's probably going to involve electrification, and it's probably going to involve some deep retrofit of the fabric. So what do they need? They need access to capital in a way that is facilitated for them, and that is something that's usable and hopefully appealing to them, and that they're able to use. And that applies, whatever tenure they're in, although there are differences involved. So I think we've got to challenge ourselves at every step of advancing this agenda now, to make sure we're developing tools that are appropriate for that application. And as I alluded to earlier, I think the fundamental thing that all the different stakeholders need is confidence in the outcomes of energy efficiency and flexibility projects, measured, consistently. The measurement technique doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but it does have to be consistent, so that you have a standard, a single definition of what we mean by an energy saving, what we mean by avoided consumption. And over a couple of years, if we're honest, of doing that, we will build up the confidence that this is something that's bankable, something that you can safely invest in, and that will be reflected in the cost of capital to the consumers at the far end of the chain. So we should just keep checking in on that goal of maximizing the uptake of energy efficiency. And if we do that and keep going and use the wisdom that there is around this virtual table, then I'm sure we'll get somewhere.
That's a brilliant ending to the day. There's nothing I could further add to it. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining on this panel. All the speakers, everyone in the room, everyone online, Sophie as well for the wonderful graphics. Thank you very much for this. All the material, the videos, everything will become available. A big thank you also to Anne and Marine for helping setting everything up. It's been a great 2.5 years. We did learn a lot. We did indeed push a lot this idea, and we hope it will be of use to many of us, creating new opportunities, new businesses, and really strive for this huge effort we have to make of changing our whole energy system. Thank you everyone for being here online, and we speak again soon.